What if the most fascinating figures from across time could meet for the first time in the hereafter, free to speak as they never could in life? Welcome to History's Afterlife. Tonight, in the vast corridors of eternity, two men who embodied vastly different relationships with power and justice encounter each other for the first time. First, Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, who led the nation through its greatest moral and constitutional crisis. Born into poverty in a Kentucky log cabin in 1809, Lincoln became a self-taught lawyer who believed deeply in the rule of law and the possibility of human redemption. His presidency from 1861 to 1865 saw the preservation of the Union and the abolition of slavery, achievements that cost him his life when he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theatre. Second, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Al Capone, who ruled Chicago's criminal underworld during Prohibition. Born to Italian immigrants in Brooklyn in 1899, Capone built a vast empire of illegal liquor, gambling and violence that made him both feared and strangely beloved by many Americans who saw him as a folk hero. His reign ended not with bullets, but with a tax evasion conviction, the only crime federal prosecutors could prove against America's most notorious gangster. One man dedicated his life to preserving the law, the other to profiting from its violation. Tonight, the Great Emancipator meets Scarface Al.
You seem familiar. Have we met?
Not exactly, Mr. President. Though I grew up looking at your picture on the penny. Al Capone. And before you say anything, I know what you're thinking.
Do you? And what might that be?
That I'm everything you fought against. The corruption, the violence, the disrespect for law and order.
I was thinking you looked smaller than the newspapers made you out to be.
Well, that's not what I expected from Honest Abe.
Perhaps neither of us is quite what the other expected. You mentioned my picture on currency. Strange, isn't it, how death grants us a kind of immortality we never possessed in life.
Speak for yourself. I was plenty famous when I was breathing. Front page of every paper in the country.
Fame and immortality are different creatures, Mr. Capone. One is loud, the other enduring. Tell me, what do you think you'll be remembered for?
I gave people what they wanted. Booze when the government said they couldn't have it. Jobs when there weren't any. I fed the hungry, clothed the poor.
And killed those who opposed you.
Yeah, I did that too.
Lincoln once wrote, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." What happens when that test is taken by those who seize power rather than inherit it?
I'm curious about that contradiction. You speak of charity and community, yet your methods were brutal.
You think I'm proud of the killing? You think I enjoyed it?
I think you accepted it as necessary. The question is whether that acceptance corrupted something essential in you, or whether it revealed something that was already there.
That's rich coming from you. How many men died because you wouldn't let the South go? 600,000? 700,000?
More than I can bear to count. But there's a difference between violence in service of justice and violence in service of profit.
Is there? Or is that just what the winners tell themselves?
The Civil War claimed roughly 750,000 American lives. Capone's organization was responsible for hundreds of deaths during the Chicago gang wars. Yet, how do we weigh the mathematics of mortality against the purposes for which lives were lost?
You're not wrong to question me. I've asked myself that same question countless times. Every night of the war, I wondered if I was a leader or simply a man too stubborn to admit defeat.
You doubted yourself?
Constantly. Anyone who wields power without doubt is dangerous, Mr. Capone. The certainty that one's cause justifies any means, well, that way lies tyranny.
But you kept going, through all that doubt, all those deaths.
Because some principles are worth dying for, even worth killing for, though that thought sickens me. The Union, the idea that government should serve all people equally, these weren't just political positions. They were moral imperatives.
And my imperative? Taking care of my family, my neighborhood, my people. That doesn't count?
It counts, but it's incomplete. You cared for your own at the expense of everyone else. I tried, imperfectly, to expand the circle of who mattered.
The government sure didn't care about my people. Italian immigrants, Irish, the poor, we were dirt to them. So we made our own rules, our own justice.
Capone was known to operate soup kitchens during the Great Depression, feeding thousands of unemployed Chicagoans when government relief programs fell short. "This is virgin territory for me," he told reporters, "but I want to be helpful."
And yet you became what you hated, someone who made rules only for those in power.
At least I was honest about it. I didn't wrap murder in flags and call it noble.
No, you wrapped it in money and called it business. Which is worse, acknowledging the terrible weight of necessary violence or treating it as just another transaction?
You sit there in your marble monument, judged by history as the great moral leader, but you suspended habeas corpus, arrested newspaper editors, let your generals burn the South to ash. How's that different from what I did?
Because I did those things to preserve a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal. You did them to preserve a criminal empire founded on the principle that might makes right.
Pretty words. But tell that to the families of the men who died for your principles.
I think about them every day. Do you think about yours?
Every night.
Lincoln's secretary, John Hay, wrote that the president would often walk the halls of the White House at night, unable to sleep, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Capone, too, was known to suffer from insomnia, though whether from guilt or fear remains unclear.
The weight of conscience, yes, I know that burden. But there's a crucial difference between us, Mr. Capone. I carry the weight of necessary evils committed in service of justice. You carry the weight of unnecessary evils committed in service of greed. The difference, I think, is what we built with that burden. I try to build something larger than myself, a more perfect union. You built something that served only you and yours.
Maybe. Or maybe you just had better press. History is written by the winners, right?
Is it? You're hardly forgotten, Mr. Capone. If anything, your legend has grown more romantic with time. The newspapers that condemned you now inspire movies that celebrate you.
Yeah, they love the idea of me. The suits, the cars, the swagger. They forget about the blood.
As they forget about mine. I'm remembered as the Great Emancipator, not as a man who authorized Sherman's march through Georgia.
Sherman's march to the sea destroyed an estimated $100 million in property and left a 60-mile-wide path of devastation across Georgia. War is hell, Sherman said. But Lincoln had approved the strategy, knowing it would break the South's will to fight.
You ever wonder if it was worth it? All that destruction, all those lives, did it really change anything?
I freed 4 million slaves. But their children and grandchildren still fought for equality long after I was gone. Sometimes I wonder if I only postponed the reckoning rather than achieving it.
You had the luxury of high ideals. I dealt with reality. And what I built worked. It fed people. It employed people. It gave them what they wanted when their government failed them.
You said you fed the hungry. That's not nothing.
Everything I gave people, I earned. Maybe not in the way you'd prefer, but I earned it. You know what gets me? I was smart enough to have played your game and won. But your game was rigged against people like me from the start. So I made my own rules.
Capone's rules were enforced with exceptional brutality. On Valentine's Day 1929, 7 members of Bugs Moran's gang were lined up against a Chicago warehouse wall and machine-gunned to death in what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. While never proven in court, most historians believe Capone ordered the killings to eliminate his rivals in the bootlegging trade.
You chose to serve only yourself rather than grapple with larger questions of right and wrong. The violence you faced was a natural consequence of the violence you chose to embrace. You built your life on avoiding moral responsibility.
Moral responsibility? I was responsible to my family, my organization, my neighborhood. That's more than most politicians can say. At least I was honest about what I was doing.
Responsible to your own, yes, but at the expense of everyone else's families, everyone else's neighborhoods. True moral responsibility extends beyond your immediate circle, Mr. Capone.
You really believed in it, didn't you? The idea that people could be better than they are.
I had to. If I'd believed otherwise, I'd have become something very much like you. Someone who used power to protect only his own interests.
Maybe you were just naive.
Maybe. But naivety in service of justice seems preferable to cynicism in service of greed.
You know what the funny thing is? I grew up poor. Really poor. And all I wanted was to make sure my family never went hungry again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what enough meant.
Capone's brother Ralph once said, "Al never wanted to be a gangster. He wanted to be respectable, to be somebody important." Yet by the time of his arrest in 1931, his organization's annual income was estimated at $105 million, roughly $1.5 billion in today's money.
I understand that hunger. Not for food, but for significance. I was born to nothing, expected to remain nothing. The difference is what we chose to build from that hunger. You had the intelligence and charisma to lead, but you chose to lead people toward destruction rather than elevation.
Easy to say when you had the law on your side.
Did I? I was criticized, threatened, called a tyrant and a despot. Half the country wanted me dead before Booth finally succeeded. The law supported me only because I fought to make it do so.
But you walked within the system.
Because I believed the system could be changed. You believed it couldn't, so you built your own system. The tragedy is that your intelligence and charisma could have changed the legitimate world as much as they changed the criminal one.
You think so?
I know so. Look at what you accomplished. Organizing thousands of people, managing vast enterprises, building loyalty that lasted decades. Those are the skills of leadership, not just crime. But you perverted every one of them in service of evil.
I used them for what worked, for what the situation demanded.
Yes, and that choice defined not just your life, but your death. You died in disgrace. Your empire crumbled. Your name became a synonym for everything wrong with America. All that talent, all that potential, wasted on bloodshed and corruption.
Thanks for the reminder.
But you also died with the knowledge that you'd provided for your family, that you'd given opportunities to people who had none, that you'd stood up to a system that had dismissed you. These facts exist, but they don't excuse a greater harm you caused. A few acts of kindness don't balance a lifetime of violence.
Maybe not by your standards, but they meant everything to the people who mattered to me.
Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, observed that Lincoln was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Might the same be said of Capone, whose final years were marked by syphilis-induced dementia and the slow dissolution of everything he'd built?
But perhaps the question isn't whether we did enough, but whether we understood what we were doing while we did it.
What do you mean?
I mean that I knew every executive order I signed, every military decision I made, would cost lives. I made those choices with full knowledge of their price. Did you?
Not at first. At first, it was just survival. Then, it was just business. By the time I understood what I'd become, it was too late to be anything else.
It's never too late. Even at the end, you could have chosen differently.
Could I? Once you're Al Capone, can you ever really stop being Al Capone?
I think that's the central question of any life, whether we're trapped by who we've been or free to become who we might be.
And what's your answer?
I think we're always free to choose, but the consequences of our past choices make some futures impossible. You couldn't have become a legitimate businessman. Too many people wanted you dead. But you could have chosen to minimize the harm you caused while you lived.
Maybe. Or maybe I'd just be remembered as a failed gangster instead of a successful one.
Is that how you want to be remembered? As a successful criminal?
No. I want to be remembered as someone who tried to protect the people he loved. But I know that's not how history sees me.
The poet Carl Sandburg, who also wrote a biography of Lincoln, once said, "The past is a bucket of ashes." Yet both men sitting here remain vivid in America's imagination, one as a symbol of moral leadership, the other as a cautionary tale about power's corruption.
History is still being written, Mr. Capone. The full story of America includes both of us, the aspiration and the failure, the nobility and the corruption. Perhaps we're both necessary to understand the whole.
You think there's a place for me in the noble story of America?
I think there's a place for you in the true story of America, which is messier and more complicated than the noble version, but also more human.
You know what I respect about you? You could have lectured me, condemned me, written me off as irredeemable. But you didn't.
Because I know that the capacity for both good and evil exists in all of us. The difference between us isn't that you're wicked and I'm righteous. It's that we made different choices when faced with power. You consistently chose the path that served your own interests at the expense of innocent people.
And you think your choices were better?
I think my choices served justice and the common good, while yours served only yourself and your criminal organization. Whether that makes them better, I believe it does, unequivocally.
Well, Mr. President, it's been educational.
Indeed it has, Mr. Capone. Perhaps you'll spend some time considering what redemption might look like for a man in your position.
I don't think redemption comes into it.
Whether you're willing to do that, that's between you and your conscience.
Lincoln, you're not what I expected.
Nor are you, Mr. Capone. But expectations and reality rarely align, do they?
In the end, perhaps Lincoln and Capone represent not opposites, but 2 points on the same spectrum of American ambition. One man who channeled his hunger for significance into preserving a nation's ideals, another who channeled his into building a criminal empire. Both understood power's intoxicating appeal and its terrible costs. Both carried the weight of their choices until their deaths. Their conversation reminds us that the line between hero and villain may be thinner than we'd like to believe, and that the true measure of a life lies not in its circumstances, but in the choices made when facing power's eternal temptation. Lincoln chose to serve something larger than himself. Capone chose to serve only himself and his own. That difference, small in the making, became vast in its consequences. Thanks for listening to History's Afterlife, a Sparky the Creative production.